The dispatch board showed her rig moving long after her last check-in. In 2018, a lone driver missed her delivery window in Montana. 7 years later, her ELD data reveals the truck kept driving for 3 more days. The call came into dispatch at 11:43 a.m. on March 15, 2018. A solo female driver reported she was making good time on Interstate 90 eastbound through Montana. She had left Spokane, Washington early that morning with a load of industrial equipment bound for Billings. The weather was clear. Traffic was light. She estimated arrival by 6 p.m., well ahead of her scheduled delivery window. Dispatch logged the call and wished her safe travels. She acknowledged and signed off. That was the last time anyone spoke to her. By 8 p.m., the receiver in Billings called the carrier to ask where the shipment was. The driver had not arrived. The carrier tried calling her cell phone. It rang once and went to voicemail. They tried again an hour later. Same result. They checked the truck's digital log, the ELD that tracks location and driving hours in real time. The device showed the truck still moving westbound on Interstate 90 near the town of Garrison, westbound, away from Billings. The carrier called dispatch and asked if the driver had reported any problems. Dispatch said no. The last contact had been at 11:43 a.m. heading east. Now 9 hours later, the truck was heading west. Something was wrong. The carrier contacted the Montana Highway Patrol. Troopers began checking rest areas and truck stops along I-90. They found nothing. No accidents had been reported. No truck matching the description had been seen. The ELD continued transmitting. At 10:15 p.m., the truck was near Drummond, still westbound. At 11:30 p.m. it was near Missoula. At 1 a.m. it crossed into Idaho. The carrier watched the tracker in real time, helpless. The truck was moving at a steady 58 miles per hour. No erratic behavior, no sudden stops, just smooth, consistent progress in the wrong direction. By dawn, on March 16th, the truck had reached Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Then it turned around. The ELD showed the truck heading east again, back toward Montana. The carrier tried calling the driver every hour. The phone rang, but no one answered. They contacted law enforcement in Idaho and Montana. Troopers were told to watch for the truck and attempt a traffic stop. But I-90 is a long highway with limited coverage. The truck passed through small towns without stopping. It did not pull into rest areas. It stayed in the right lane, maintaining speed, obeying traffic laws. By noon on March 16th, it was back in Montana, heading east toward Billings. At 3:47 p.m., the truck passed Billings without stopping. The carrier called the receiver and explained the situation. The receiver was confused and angry. They had rescheduled their operations to accommodate the late delivery. Now the truck had driven past them. Where was it going? The carrier had no answer. The ELD showed the truck continuing east on I-90 toward the Wyoming border. By nightfall it had entered Wyoming. By midnight it was near Sheridan. Then at 2:18 a.m. on March 17th, the ELD stopped transmitting. The last known position was on a rural stretch of I-90 between Sheridan and Buffalo, Wyoming. Montana and Wyoming state patrols coordinated a search. They drove the highway at first light. No truck, no debris, no signs of an accident. They checked every exit and side road within a 50-mile radius. Nothing. The truck had vanished as completely as the driver. The driver had been hauling freight for 6 years. She ran solo routes mostly, preferring the independence of working alone. Co-workers described her as competent and professional. She had a clean safety record. No accidents, no violations, no complaints. Friends said she was quiet but friendly. She called her sister every Sunday without fail. Her sister said she had sounded normal during their last call on March 11th, tired but upbeat. She was looking forward to a few days off after the Billings run. The cargo was industrial pumps and fittings, nothing unusual or particularly valuable. The trailer had been sealed with a numbered bolt at the loading dock in Spokane. Standard procedure. Breaking the seal without authorization was a serious violation. The driver knew this. She had hauled sealed trailers many times. There was no reason to suspect she would tamper with the cargo or deviate from her route without cause. Investigators reviewed the driver's finances. No unusual transactions, no large withdrawals, no debts. Her bank account showed routine deposits and expenses. She was not wealthy, but she was stable. She owned a small apartment in Spokane. Her truck lease payments were current. She had no reason to disappear. Her sister said she had been planning to visit family in Oregon that summer. She had already requested time off. The ELDDA became the focus of the investigation. These devices are federally mandated and track every aspect of a truck's operation: location, speed, engine status, driving hours. The data is stored locally on the device and uploaded to a central server in real time. The driver's ELD showed her leaving Spokane at 5:47 a.m. on March 15th. She traveled east on I-90 at an average speed of 62 miles per hour. At 11:39 a.m., she was near Butte, Montana, right on schedule. At 11:43 a.m., she called dispatch. Then at 12:07 p.m., the truck slowed to 35 miles per hour. At 12:14 p.m., it exited the interstate at Deer Lodge. Deer Lodge was not on her route. The exit led to a small town with a few gas stations and restaurants. The ELD showed the truck stopped at a location identified as a truck stop on the north side of town. It remained stationary for 18 minutes. Then it moved again, returning to I-90. But instead of heading east toward Billings, it headed west, back toward Spokane. The ELD recorded this westbound travel for over 12 hours, all the way to Idaho and back. The device showed no stops during that time. No fuel, no rest breaks, no meals, just continuous driving. Federal regulations require truckers to take a 30-minute break after 8 hours of driving. They must also stop driving after 14 hours on duty. The driver had been on duty since 5:47 a.m. By 8 p.m. she should have been legally required to stop. Yet the ELD showed the truck moving. Either she was violating federal regulations, which was out of character, or someone else was driving. But who? The truck stop in Deer Lodge was investigated. Security footage from March 15th was reviewed. The cameras captured the driver's truck entering the parking lot at 12:16 p.m. The driver got out of the cab. She was wearing jeans, a jacket, and a baseball cap. She walked toward the building. The camera angle was poor, and her face was not clearly visible. She entered the truck stop and disappeared from view. 18 minutes later, she emerged. She walked back to her truck, climbed into the cab, and drove away. The footage showed no one else near the truck. She appeared to be alone. Investigators examined the footage frame by frame. In 3 frames, taken as the driver walked toward the building, a shadow appeared beside her. The shadow was tall and elongated, suggesting a figure walking parallel to her. But no second person was visible in the frames. The lighting in the parking lot came from overhead fixtures. Shadows should have fallen directly beneath objects, not beside them. A forensic video analyst reviewed the footage. She said the shadow might have been a compression artifact, a glitch created when analog footage was digitized. Or it might have been a shadow from a nearby pole or vehicle that happened to align with the driver's movement. She could not definitively say it was another person, but she also could not rule it out. The truck stop manager was interviewed again. He did not remember seeing the driver that day. March 15th had been a busy day, and dozens of truckers had passed through. He checked the register. No transaction matched the driver's name or payment methods. She had not bought fuel or food. What had she done during those 18 minutes? The manager could not say. He showed investigators around the building. The restrooms were on the north side, past the dining area. The pay phone was near the front entrance. To use the phone, the driver would have had to walk past multiple cameras, yet she never appeared on them. One employee, a cashier who had worked the day shift on March 15th, remembered something odd. She said a woman matching the driver's description had come in and asked to use a phone. The cashier had pointed to the pay phone outside. The woman had nodded and left. The cashier said she had seemed distracted, not distressed, but not quite present either, like someone lost in thought. The cashier remembered because the woman never came back inside. Most people who used the payphone came back in to buy something afterward. This woman had not. One detail stood out. The driver had walked toward the building, but the interior cameras did not capture her entering the main area. The truck stop had a small convenience store, restrooms, and a dining area. All were covered by cameras. The driver did not appear in any of those recordings. The manager suggested she might have used the restroom and left quickly, avoiding the camera angles, but that seemed unlikely. 18 minutes was too long for a brief stop. And why had she not bought anything? Truckers rarely stop without refueling or grabbing food. The truck stop had a payphone near the entrance. It was an old relic, rarely used. Investigators checked the phone records. A call had been placed from that phone at 12:22 p.m. on March 15th. The call lasted 4 minutes and connected to a number in western Montana. The number belonged to a disconnected landline in a rural area near the town of Superior. No subscriber information was available. The line had been inactive for over 2 years. The call should not have gone through, yet the phone company confirmed it had. Someone had called a dead number from the Deer Lodge truck stop during the exact window when the driver was there. Investigators tried to trace the number's history. The landline had been installed in the 1980s at a property that no longer existed. County records showed the land had been sold and subdivided multiple times. The original structure, a small cabin, had burned down in 2003. The phone line had been disconnected in 2016. There was no reason for it to accept calls, yet it had. The phone company could not explain it. They suggested a database error or equipment malfunction, but the call log was clear. 4 minutes. March 15, 2018, at 12:22 p.m. from Deer Lodge to a ghost number in Superior. The westbound travel began shortly after the driver left the truck stop. She merged back onto I-90 and headed west. For the next 12 hours, the ELD recorded steady progress. No stops, no slowdowns, no deviation. At 1 a.m. on March 16th, the truck crossed into Idaho. Then, near Coeur d'Alene, it turned around and headed east. Why? What had prompted the reversal? The ELD data offered no clues. The truck had simply reversed course and retraced its path. By the afternoon of March 16th, the truck was back in Montana. It passed Billings without stopping. It continued east into Wyoming. Then at 2:18 a.m. on March 17th, the signal stopped. The last transmission placed the truck on I-90 between Sheridan and Buffalo. The coordinates were precise, but when investigators searched that location, they found nothing. The highway was straight and flat. Visibility was good. A truck could not simply vanish there, yet it had. Weeks passed. The search expanded. Aircraft with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the surrounding terrain. Nothing. Divers searched rivers and reservoirs along I-90. Nothing. The driver's phone was tracked. The last ping came from a tower near Billings on March 16th at 3:50 p.m. After that, the phone was either off or destroyed. Text messages and call logs showed nothing unusual. The driver had texted her sister on March 14th to confirm their Sunday call. She had checked weather reports on March 15th before leaving Spokane. Normal behavior. No indication of distress or intent to disappear. One puzzling detail emerged from the phone records. On March 15th, at 12:26 p.m., 4 minutes after the payphone call at the Deer Lodge truck stop, the driver's cell phone had briefly connected to a tower near Superior, Montana. Superior was 60 miles northwest of Deer Lodge. Cell towers have limited range, usually 5 to 10 miles. For the driver's phone to ping a Superior tower from Deer Lodge was impossible. The phone would have needed to be in or near Superior, but the ELD showed the truck had still been in Deer Lodge at that time. The two data points conflicted. Either the ELD was wrong, or the phone had been separated from the truck. A telecommunications engineer reviewed the data. He said cell tower pings could be erratic in mountainous terrain. Signals sometimes bounced off ridges and connected to distant towers. The Superior ping might have been an anomaly, but he admitted the timing was suspicious. The ping occurred exactly 4 minutes after the pay phone call. That suggested a connection. Perhaps the driver had called someone in Superior. Perhaps that person had her phone, or perhaps the phone data was simply corrupted. Without the physical phone, verification was impossible. The case went cold. The driver was declared missing. Her apartment was searched. Everything was in order. Bills paid, fridge stocked, laundry folded. She had left for a routine trip and never returned. Her sister cleaned out the apartment and donated most of the belongings. She kept a few photos and personal items. She said she could not bring herself to accept that her sister was gone. There had been no goodbye, no closure, just silence. Then in March of 2025, 7 years after the driver disappeared, a rancher in northern Wyoming was repairing fence line on his property. The land was remote, miles from the nearest road, accessible only by ATV. While checking a section near a dry creek bed, he noticed something unusual, metal glinting in the sagebrush. He walked over and found a tractor-trailer rig, half buried in sand and debris. The truck was old and weathered, paint faded, tires flat, windows cracked, but the frame was intact. The rancher called the county sheriff. Deputies hiked out to the site. They confirmed it was a commercial truck. The trailer was still attached. The numbered seal on the trailer doors was intact. They ran the VIN and the seal number. The truck matched the description of the driver who had disappeared in 2018. The seal matched the paperwork from the Spokane loading dock. 7 years later, the truck had been found. The location made no sense. The truck was 15 miles south of I-90, deep in open rangeland. No roads led to the site. The terrain was rough, covered in rock and sagebrush. How the truck had reached that location was unclear. The rancher said he had owned the land for 30 years and checked the fence line every spring. The truck had not been there in 2024. It had appeared sometime in the past year, but there were no tire tracks leading to it, no evidence of it being driven or towed. It was simply there, as if it had been dropped from the sky. The cab was searched. The driver was not there. The interior was dusty and sun-damaged. The keys were in the ignition. A thermos sat in the cup holder, still half full of liquid that had evaporated to a brown residue. The driver's logbook was in the glove box. The last entry was dated March 15, 2018, at 11:30 a.m. It noted the truck's position near Butte and the expected arrival time in Billings. Nothing unusual, no indication of trouble. The ELD device was recovered and sent to a lab for analysis. Technicians extracted the stored data. The device had recorded everything: the westbound travel, the turnaround in Idaho, the eastbound return. And then, after the last transmission at 2:18 a.m. on March 17th, the device had continued recording. The truck had kept moving, not on I-90, not on any road. The GPS coordinates showed the truck traveling south across open country, away from the highway, deep into Wyoming rangeland. The truck had driven for 3 more days. According to the ELD, the truck left I-90 at 2:18 a.m. on March 17th and headed south. It traveled at speeds ranging from 5 to 15 miles per hour, consistent with off-road movement. It crossed terrain that should have been impassable for a loaded tractor-trailer. creek beds, rocky slopes, dense sagebrush. Yet the ELD recorded steady progress. At 9:42 a.m. on March 18th, the truck stopped. It remained stationary for 6 hours. Then it moved again, another 2 miles south. At 11:14 p.m. on March 18th, it stopped permanently. The engine shut off. The device continued transmitting for another 14 hours, logging position and battery voltage. Then at 1:37 p.m. on March 19th, the ELD powered down. The battery was dead. The truck was silent. Investigators plotted the coordinates. The final position matched the location where the rancher had found the truck. The data aligned perfectly, but the route made no sense. There were no roads, no trails, no paths capable of supporting a truck. The terrain was wilderness. A fully loaded tractor trailer could not have traveled that route without getting stuck. Yet the ELD said it had. The trailer was examined. The seal was photographed and cut. The doors opened to reveal the cargo still secured. Industrial pumps and fittings, exactly as listed on the manifest. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been added. The cargo had sat in the trailer for 7 years, untouched. The receiver was contacted. They had long since replaced the order. The equipment was now obsolete. The trailer and its contents were declared salvage. A forensic team processed the truck. They found the driver's fingerprints on the steering wheel, gear shift and door handles. They found her DNA on the seat and in the sleeper berth. But they found no signs of anyone else. No unknown prints. No foreign DNA. If someone had driven the truck after the driver disappeared, they had left no trace. Search teams scoured the area around the truck. They used dogs, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. The terrain was vast and empty, miles of sagebrush and rock under an open sky. After 2 weeks, the dogs alerted near a cluster of juniper trees about half a mile from the truck. Investigators dug carefully. They found bones, human bones. The remains were incomplete and scattered by animals. A forensic anthropologist examined them and confirmed they belonged to an adult female. Dental records matched the missing driver. The bones showed no signs of trauma, no fractures, no marks from weapons or tools. Cause of death could not be determined. The anthropologist estimated the remains had been exposed for several years, consistent with a death in 2018. Time of death was impossible to pinpoint. The driver had died somewhere near that juniper grove and had lain there undiscovered for 7 years. Investigators tried to reconstruct the timeline. The driver had stopped at the Deer Lodge truck stop on March 15th. She had made or received a call on the payphone. She had left the truck stop and driven west for reasons unknown. She had turned around in Idaho and driven east, passing her delivery point without stopping. At 2:18 a.m. on March 17th, somewhere near Buffalo, Wyoming, the truck had left I-90 and headed south. It had traveled across impassable terrain for 3 days. Then it had stopped. The driver had left the truck and walked half a mile to the juniper grove. There she had died. But none of it made sense. Why had she driven west? Why had she ignored her delivery? Why had she left the highway and driven into the wilderness? And how had the truck crossed terrain that should have stopped it within minutes? The ELD data was precise and verifiable, so the truck had traveled exactly where the data said it had. But the physical evidence contradicted the data. The terrain was impossible, yet the truck was there. A mechanical engineer examined the truck. He inspected the undercarriage, suspension, and drivetrain. He found no damage consistent with off-road travel. The truck should have had bent axles, damaged springs, torn undercarriage panels. It should have been covered in mud and scrapes. It was dirty and weathered, but intact. The engineer said the truck could not have made the journey the ELD described, not without catastrophic damage. Yet the ELD said it had, and the truck was exactly where the ELD said it would be. A second expert, a geologist who specialized in terrain analysis, was consulted. She reviewed topographical maps of the route the ELD had recorded. The terrain between I-90 and the final location included steep slopes with grades exceeding 20%, creek beds with loose sand and rock, and dense vegetation. A loaded tractor trailer, weighing up to 80,000 pounds, would sink in soft sand. It would high center on rocks. It would lack the ground clearance to navigate uneven terrain. The geologist calculated that the truck would have become immobilized within the first mile, yet the ELD showed it traveling 15 miles. She visited the site and examined the ground around the truck. She found no tracks leading to it. No ruts, no disturbed soil patterns. The sagebrush and grass around the truck were undisturbed, as if the vehicle had been placed there rather than driven. She dug test holes and examined soil compaction. The ground beneath the truck showed no compression, consistent with the weight of a loaded trailer resting there for years. She said it was as if the truck weighed nothing, or as if it had not been there very long. But the weathering on the paint and the condition of the tires suggested years of exposure. The physical evidence contradicted itself at every turn. One theory proposed that the ELD data had been tampered with. Someone had edited the logs to create a false trail, but ELD systems are encrypted and tamper-resistant. Altering the data would require specialized knowledge and equipment. The manufacturer sent engineers to examine the recovered device. They ran diagnostics and checked for signs of tampering. They found none. The data was authentic. The encryption keys were intact. The device had not been compromised. It had simply recorded what it observed: a truck traveling across impossible terrain for 3 days. The engineers noted one anomaly. During the 3-day period of off-road travel, the ELD had recorded engine hours and fuel consumption. The data showed the engine running continuously, burning fuel at a normal rate. Yet when the truck was recovered, the fuel tank was empty. The engine could not have run for 3 days on the fuel that had been in the tank when the driver left Spokane. She would have needed to refuel at least twice. But the ELD showed no stops for fuel, and there were no gas stations in the wilderness where the truck had traveled. The engineers could not explain it. The math did not work, but the data was there, locked in encrypted memory, impossible to alter, impossible to ignore. Another theory suggested the driver had experienced a medical emergency or mental breakdown. She had driven erratically, left the highway in a confused state, and died of exposure. But her behavior before the disappearance showed no signs of distress. She had called dispatch calmly. She had driven competently. The truck stop footage showed her walking normally. If she had suffered a sudden breakdown, it must have occurred after she left Deer Lodge. But what could cause such a rapid and complete change? A psychiatrist reviewed the case. He noted that certain medical conditions could cause sudden behavioral changes: brain tumors, seizures, strokes. The driver might have experienced an acute event that impaired her judgment. She might have driven west, believing she was heading east. She might have turned off the highway, thinking it was a rest area. In a confused state, she might have driven until the truck ran out of fuel. Then she might have wandered into the wilderness and collapsed. The psychiatrist admitted this was speculative. Without an autopsy, which was impossible given the condition of the remains, the theory could not be confirmed. The payphone call remained unexplained. Who had the driver called? And why? The number led nowhere. The landline had been dead for years, yet the call had connected. 4 minutes of conversation to a ghost number. Investigators contacted phone company engineers. They examined the switching equipment that had routed the call. They found nothing unusual. The call had been processed normally. The system had connected the Deer Lodge payphone to the Superior landline. The fact that the landline was inactive should have prevented the connection, but the system did not know the line was dead. It simply routed the call. What had happened on the other end was unknown. Had someone answered? Had the driver heard silence? Had she left a message? The phone company had no recordings. The call was lost to time. The driver's sister struggled to accept the findings. She said her sister had been careful and sensible. She would not have driven into the wilderness without reason. She would not have ignored her delivery. Something had happened at that truck stop, something that had changed everything. The sister believed someone had been involved. The payphone call, the westbound travel, the impossible off-road journey. It was too strange to be random. Someone had done this to her sister, but there was no evidence, no witnesses, no suspects, just data that made no sense, and a body found 7 years too late. The case was officially closed. The driver's death was listed as undetermined, with contributing factors of exposure and possible disorientation. The truck was released to the insurance company and sold for scrap. The cargo was hauled away. The land where the truck had been found was returned to the rancher. He said he would avoid that section of his property from now on. It felt wrong. Unlucky. He said his cattle avoided it too. They grazed everywhere except that dry creek bed. He did not know why. Animals sense things people do not. In the months after the case closed, other truckers began reporting strange experiences on I-90 in Montana. Some said their ELD devices showed erratic data, sudden position jumps, speed readings that did not match their actual speed, routes that appeared and disappeared. Most dismissed it as equipment glitches, but a few said it felt deliberate, like something was interfering with their systems. One driver said his ELD showed him driving through Deer Lodge, even though he had taken a different route. Another said her device recorded her stopped at a location she had never been. The glitches lasted minutes, then resolved. The drivers reported them to their carriers. The carriers blamed the devices. The manufacturers blamed the drivers. No one could explain it. A technology journalist investigated the reports. She contacted ELD manufacturers and asked if they had identified any systemic issues in Montana. Most said no. One engineer, speaking off the record, said the company had received complaints but could not replicate the problem. The devices worked perfectly in lab tests. The issues only occurred in the field, in a specific corridor of I-90 between Butte and Billings. The engineer said the company had sent technicians to drive the route and monitor device performance. Everything had functioned normally. The glitches, if they existed, were isolated and unexplainable. The journalist drove I-90 herself, carrying 3 different ELD-capable devices. She monitored them continuously from Spokane to Billings. All 3 recorded accurate data. No glitches, no anomalies. She stopped at the Deer Lodge truck stop and walked inside. The payphone was still there, dusty and forgotten. She tried using it. The line was dead. She interviewed the manager. He did not remember the 2018 incident. He said payphones were relics. No one used them. She asked if he had heard about the missing driver. He had not. She showed him a photo. He did not recognize her. The case had made news 7 years ago, but memories fade. The truck stop had seen thousands of drivers since then. One missing woman was not remarkable. The journalist wrote an article calling the case an unsolvable mystery. She noted the contradictions, the data that said one thing, the evidence that said another. She speculated that the truth lay somewhere between them. Perhaps the driver had suffered a medical event. Perhaps the ELD had malfunctioned. Perhaps both had happened, creating a cascade of failures that ended in tragedy. She admitted she had no answers. The case resisted simple explanations. It was a hole in the world, a place where logic broke down and questions remained unanswered. The driver's sister read the article. She contacted the journalist and thanked her for keeping the story alive. She said she still thought about the payphone call. Her sister had called someone or something in Superior. The call had lasted 4 minutes. What had been said? Who had been on the other end? The sister had driven to Superior once, looking for answers. She had found nothing. The town was small and quiet. No one remembered a disconnected landline. No one had heard of her sister. The sister said it felt like chasing shadows, but she could not stop. She needed to know, even if the truth was worse than not knowing. I-90 runs east and west across Montana, cutting through mountains and plains, connecting Spokane to Billings and beyond. Truckers drive it every day. They haul freight across the state, through small towns and vast empty spaces. Most make the journey without incident. They arrive on time. They deliver their cargo. They move on. But some, a very few, encounter something else. A call to a dead number. A route that should not exist. An ELD that records impossible journeys. They tell stories, but no one believes them. Glitches, people say. Equipment failures. Driver error. But the stories persist, and somewhere south of I-90, in a dry creek bed marked by juniper trees, the wind moves through sagebrush and carries the scent of rust and dust and questions that will never be answered.